Can you please tell me what you know about your family's genocide story? Where they're from, anything?
Yeah, I know that my both of my parents were from Aintab, and I know that my dad's father was actually part of the genocide when they walked from Deir Zor and ended up in Haleb. So that's how I was born in Aleppo. Yeah.
Do you know what work they did in Aintab before the genocide?
I don't. I do actually wish that I knew. So I wish something like this existed where they would tell the stories and it was preserved. But I don't know exactly what they did. I know that when they arrived, they kind of just did whatever they can to survive and recreate themselves. But I don't know what they did before.
And do you know, did they tell you anything about like life in Aintab, or did your grandfather ever tell you stories about? Did you know your grandfather?
I did. He did pass away when I was very young. He also lost his voice when I was very young, so I don't even actually remember having conversations with him. Yeah, so I don't really know.
Did
But
your dad tell you stories about your grandfather?
no, not that much. I know that on the way from, like, when they were walking to Derzor, he was almost kind of abandoned on the way because he was a baby. And then they felt bad and they went back and picked him up. So it's kind of interesting for me to hear. Actually, my grandfather survived death like 3 times. So it's interesting that one of them was that part when they were walking from Aintab to Aleppo, and he almost got thrown out basically, and then they went back and picked him up and brought him, and that's how my family started.
Do you know if maybe it was because sometimes I've heard the babies were too loud, or the babies it was too much to care for them on the desert road, or
I think it was something toward, like, along those lines where they just needed to do whatever they needed to do to kind of keep going and survive. I don't know the details, so I don't want to kind of misrepresent. So I don't know the details of why, but I know that that was part of the journey where he almost didn't make it.
And do you know anything from your mom's side?
Not at all, no.
And but she's from Aintab also.
Yes, yeah. Both my grandparents and both my grandmothers are from Aintab.
And do you know if they also had to walk from Aintab to?
Yeah, all of them got there through the Deir Zor kind of walk.
And I was going to ask you if in your family it's important to talk about the genocide, and if you talk about it a lot, if your parents talk about why it's important to remember these stories.
It is. So my mom actually, although she studied like business, but she ended up coming to Armenia and learning Armenian history, and she became an Armenian teacher in my school. Just because we thought, like, it's part of our day-to-day life to talk about the genocide, talk about the Armenian history, and how it's important for us to preserve it. So it's almost kind of this spiritual journey as well versus the cultural. So yeah, it's very important. Yeah.
And in Aleppo, how did you commemorate the genocide on April 24th?
I remember every single year our school would have an entire kind of ceremony where we would, everyone would be responsible to go up and represent something and tell a story, or even learn something from the Armenian like literature. It was a way for us to kind of keep it alive. Yeah, so we organized a lot of walks and ceremonies. Yeah.
And what well, I'll ask you this later, but you then moved after Aleppo, you moved to Canada, and now you live in Armenia. So maybe later we can talk about the difference between genocide commemoration in all of those places, and just about being Armenian in all those places.
Yeah.
But for now, let's stick with Haleb. So what part of Haleb were you born in?
Haleb is pretty small. We moved a lot when we were young, so I ended up, what I remember the most is I was from like Sheikh Taha, that's the area that I was from, but I wasn't born in that area. We kind of moved 3 or 4 times when I was a child, but I always went to Gërtasirat Tbroz, like the school, and I went there from when I was 3 years old to 17 until I moved out of Canada. So my entire memories are in that school. My social life, my education, everything is kind of in that building complex, I want to say. Yeah.
And what school did you go to?
Gërtasirat, it's called. Yeah.
Was that a very common Armenian school to go to?
It was one of the smaller ones because it only went up to grade 6 first, and then my brother's grade, actually, who's 2 years older than me, was the first grade where they started opening up classes as they moved up. So he was the first 7th grader and 8th and so on, and up until we had grade 12. It's one of the smaller ones. There's like the Parikorzagan and Gemaran that are the kind of the bigger schools. But yeah, I went to Bertasidas.
Do you know why your family chose that one?
We were not necessarily in any political affiliation when it came to the Armenian communities, and that was one that was very shezok, as we call it, like not affiliated with any political. So it was the most kind of just everyone went there. That
Neutral.
Yeah, neutral. My dad also went there when he was a child, so it just kind of continued in the family that we all went there.
And did your parents actually moving back to their lives before yours? Did they ever tell you about any difficulties growing up in Aleppo?
Not necessarily, because for all I remember up until the war, obviously, is that Aleppo or Syria overall was a very inclusive community. So although we were technically a minority as Armenians, but we were very respected, and we were citizens of Syria. So we never felt not included at all in anything. So nothing specific that stands out, because they were very able to achieve their dreams and they were respected. So nothing specific, no.
And what about challenges starting a new life in Syria right after the genocide? Did they talk about your grandparents' challenges?
So my dad's side, there were 6 kids, so obviously it was financially a little bit challenging. And it's interesting that 3 of my uncles, including my dad, actually came to Armenia to study and complete their education. So that was always an interesting part for me, that as a child I didn't really understand why they left Syria to come here to study. But as I kind of grew up, I understood it a little better, and I'm a little bit proud of that part. That I always say, since I've been in Armenia, that my dad served the army in Armenia. I don't know why that's kind of a pride point for me, but they were able to come here and complete their education here, and then come back to Syria to start their work.
Do you know why they decided to do that? Was that a common thing to do in Syria?
To be completely honest, because in Syria you have to collect certain grades to be able to go into medical school, but in Armenia it wasn't like that. So, and they all wanted to be doctors, so they came here too.
And do you know what it was like for him living in the Soviet Union?
I hear stories from my dad, but I don't necessarily know of specific difficulties or things that were easy. But I hear a lot of stories from my dad of how that 5 years of his life, especially that he got to do with one of his brothers, and the other brother was a bit older, that it was a big part of his life, and it's a big part of his story, but nothing specific. Yeah.
And so it seems that Armenia was always something that was, being Armenian of course was always important, but then also Armenia the country was important. And so did you, when growing up in Syria, did you ever travel to Armenia? Did your family think a lot about going back to Armenia?
Not coming back, but we definitely traveled. So when I was a child, we actually came here for 15 days, and it was this collective trip that we did with my cousins. So it was 2 families. We got together and we came here for 15 days, and every single day we went to a different spiritual, cultural, historical landscape. So it was I remember snippets of it, and then I completely forgot about it until I came back. And I remember going to Khorvirab was the first time when I walked into the space, and I felt that I've been here before. So I remember pictures and stuff, but I don't remember the entire story. But I think it was good that we did it when we were kids, because it kind of stays in your long-term memory in a way. So it was always important for them to bring us here and connect us with it, although it wasn't as easy as just let's go there for every vacation.
And do you remember what your first impression was? Maybe you were too young when you got to Armenia after having learned about it your whole life in Syria, and then finally coming here and seeing it.
I remember the biggest thing for us was that everybody's Armenian here, because for us, obviously in school, you have your little communities and your bubble that this is where the Armenians are, those are the Armenians, and you go to Sunday, schools and stuff that are about Armenia, and then you come here and that's the everyday life. And I remember joking about that, the police officers are also Armenian, because for us, not to say that the police officers in Syria were the bad guys or anything, but they were not the Armenians. You knew that people in the official positions or people who worked for the government and people who were outside of your bubble were the not Armenians. And then coming here and realizing that everybody's Armenian, even the car plates and everything is just Armenian, it was very interesting for me, because that Armenia was like this magical land, and then you see it and you realize like, oh, it's actually there. It's not just the history that we are taught about in classes and school.
So in Syria, you in Aleppo specifically, you had a really big Armenian community. So, but you're saying here everyone is Armenian, and you still in Syria had non-Armenians. But how much did you really interact with non-Armenians in Syria?
So I actually participated in a lot of extracurricular activities, I guess, that allowed me to interact with the world outside of my school. Because outside of school, obviously, you're not going to have just for Armenian things. So we were very much interacting with the day-to-day life that were not Armenians. For me, my identity was very kind of confusing. I always thought of myself as a Syrian Armenian, not an Armenian. So I embraced it. I knew that everything I watched on TV was in Arabic. So, and everything we've learned in school, even though we've had, obviously it was an Armenian school and we've had Armenian classes and Armenian religious classes, but everything else we've learned was in Arabic. So you're still interacting with that world. We've had so many like Syrian teachers. We've had some Syrian students as well with us that were actually my very close friends. So we've learned to kind of live together in this intertwined, commingling kind of society. So it wasn't that you're Armenian and they're not Armenian. It was just all together very cohesive. So that's why it was interesting for me to see a community that's everybody's Armenian. So you're so conscious about that you're actually not that conscious about it because you feel that that's the normal life and you feel like every Armenian is a diasporan. That's why Armenia, the actual country, is just this very land that is, it's the everyday life. Yeah.
And in Syria, which activities did you do that were Armenian?
That were Armenian? Not as much as I would have hoped, I think. I didn't go to dance classes or anything that were culturally Armenian or anything. So I would say just school and going to scouts. Those were the only Armenian activities that I've done with the school and with the Armenian community.
A lot of Syrian Armenians that I've spoken with tried to stay just in the Syrian Armenian community. Do you have any idea why, like, your family might have been different and might have, like, encouraged you to do activities with non-Armenians?
My family has always been very, not only just open-minded, but they wanted me to just live in the real world and be prepared for being a little bit more realistic and grounded, because they know that we do live in the diaspora, and when they kind of had the intuition that we're not always going to be in Syria. So they want me to be prepared for having skills or be more like rounded person that is not just in the Armenian community, so we can thrive wherever we go. Same for my brother. For all I remember, after school we would run around doing different classes, like going to painting, chess, like playing different instruments. So we were always just on the outside world, adapting.
For you, you said earlier that you feel Syrian Armenian. So if I were to ask you if you feel more Armenian or Syrian Armenian, you would say Syrian Armenian?
I still don't know, to be honest. I do feel like since we've left, it's funny that I identify myself very differently based on the country that I go to. So like in Syria, I was Armenian, but when we went to Canada, I was Syrian Armenian. And now that I'm here, I'm Syrian Canadian Armenian. So I'm still trying to figure out what the definition of my Armenianness means.
Yeah. That was going to be my next question. For you, what does it mean to be Syrian and what does it mean to be Armenian?
For me, like, Armenian is very different than being Syrian Armenian, just because being a diasporan Armenian generally means, now that I've been in Armenia for 8 months, I'm realizing the differences between someone who was born and raised here or someone who was born and raised somewhere else that preserve their Armenianness, let's call it. So I don't exactly know what it means yet for me to be Syrian Armenian or a Syrian Armenian who lived in Canada for 8 years, but I do know that it's not exactly the same thing as being born and raised here. I think that I'm a little bit more conscious about certain different parts of what it means to preserve the Armenianness, but I don't know the exact definition yet.
And what was your favorite part of living in Syria?
I would say the community. It was very kind of this warm, intermingled community. We lived very peacefully together with the the Syrians, and there was Syrian Muslims and Syrian Christians, and then there was the Armenians. And I remember even this day where the Armenians did a lot of work in the Syrian community to be more inclusive, not just towards like each other culturally, but just an inclusive community. So having schools for different needs or all of that. So I remember my dad was part of one of those projects, and he got the opportunity to go and meet with the president and his wife. And I remember that moment for me was that where everything was kind of connecting together, where I am in Syria, but we're doing something that's very an Armenian project, and everything is just coming together. Yeah. So.
Your dad met the Syrian president and did a project in Armenia?
Yeah, so they actually opened this school called Arevik school, and it was for children with disabilities. And there was nothing like that existed in Syria yet. And it wasn't just for Armenians, it was for everybody. So I remember that they were kind of like not rewarded, but they were recognized for it. Therefore, they kind of met with the president's wife, and they went to like Damascus. So they had a picture together. I remember that picture kind of was on our piano. So for forever, I remember it was them kind of recognizing that the Armenian community or the Armenians in the community are doing everything to develop that community. So it didn't need to be just the Armenian community, but the community of Syria, whatever that meant. And that meant that the Armenians were part of that.
Is that Arevik the same one that is now in the Holland like downstairs?
It probably is, but I don't know.
Is your dad living here now?
No, my dad is in Toronto now, so not my entire family, my immediate family is in Toronto, Canada.
And so could he potentially be running something from there in Armenia?
I wish that he was, but I don't think logistically it's something that's been done yet. But I know that since we've been in Canada, we've always talked about the Armenian community and the Armenian community in Syria also, and the kind of life that, or the impact that we were able to have in that community versus the impact that we're having in the Canadian Armenian community and the differences. So I know that's something that's been missing in our lives, which I could say maybe that's the reason why I just got up and came to Armenia.
What are some of those differences?
I think when you immigrate at an age where you're not a child anymore, like for my parents specifically, they were established. My dad was a dentist, and I was 17 when we moved there. What you're trying to do is like survival instincts. So you're thinking about work and learning the language and how to navigate around a huge city versus the community that you kind of grew up where everybody knew who you are and you were already kind of integrated, and then you're making everything to make it a better community. So I think for us, that kind of got lost in a way when we immigrated. And after you kind of get back on your feet and you figure out that you're okay now, you start missing that fulfillment in your life.
I was going to ask you, when you said your dad met with the president, how do you think that the government treated the Armenian community?
They treated us amazingly. I remember even going to all those competitions from school that were not just for Armenians, obviously. So it was just talent competitions that you went to when you were grade 5, 6, 7, and you were not allowed to talk about religion. You were not allowed to discriminate, and those were rooted in me, like from that time. I'm gonna get emotional now, but I do remember times where all we were thinking about is, this is the community, and like you're developing yourself, and you're grade 5. I don't even know what age that is, but all you're thinking about is just developing yourself and like living in a harmonious way. We've had like churches in front of mosques, and that was more than normal for us. Like we all prayed together, and it was totally like a peaceful community.
Did you ever feel that being a religious and ethnic? Did you ever feel like you were a minority in Syria because Armenians have different ethnicity and religion than the majority?
Not at all. I always just felt that Syria is a place where Armenians and Syrians lived, or not even Syrians, like Arabs and Armenians we just lived there. So to me, that was the norm versus feeling like I was a minority. Yeah.
And do you think, I know you don't live there now, but do you think the war has kind of damaged that harmonious relationship?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, to your point, I haven't been back, and it's my dream to go back. But I don't think it's going to be the same, because the war was very based on religious agendas. And I don't think it was led by the government. So I don't think it's going to be the same. But although I do feel that the government is putting all the effort they can to kind of keep it that way. And it's funny that one of my new hobbies now turned into watching videos like webcams of people just going on the streets and filming the streets of Syria or Halep specifically. And I can see that there's still the traces of the churches and the mosques and everything being together, but it's definitely not going to be as the same because the volume of people that kind of left. So I don't think it's the same, but I do want to go explore it. I don't want to make assumptions. Yeah.
That's really interesting. What from those videos that you've seen, like what has changed physically?
A lot of the buildings and the streets, and yeah, like you can hear a lot of the, like, people put music, like background music on it, and those musics are music from like my childhood that I've listened to when it was just peaceful life. And then now you see it as this destructed city, not every corner, but most of the corners, and they're trying to kind of hold on to this history, but it's sad to see that it's not exactly the same. Yeah, the streets and the infrastructurally speaking, it's not the same.
And what attachment do you think you have to Syria? Like, why does it make you sad to see that? Is it because it's where you grew up? Is it because you really cared about the history of the city? What do you think makes you feel?
It does have a lot of history, but for me, it's my memories and that's where my family started, and that's where we celebrated every Christmas, and even like for Ramadan, like we used to celebrate that too. It didn't matter for us what kind of religious celebration it was. Like the whole city just came together to celebrate everything. So for me to see that those spots that I have a lot of memories in, and the spots that I kind of grew up to be who I am, they no longer exist. And I remember one day when we were in Canada and I heard that my school got bombed. That to me was just, because that's what I told you, like my school was where I went from when I was 3 years old to 17, and my every memory I have is there. It was just so hard for me to hear that, even though it's the location, but also the people are not there anymore. Everybody left, and not everybody, but a lot of people left. So it's hard for me to see that my memories are just memories now, and I can't go back to relive them because it's just not there anymore.
And you said it's your dream to go back and visit.
Mm-hmm.
Would you ever go back to live there?
I don't think I would live there, just because I think when I go back, it's not going to be the same or what I'm expecting it to be. But what I'll say is that when we left, it was the beginning of the war, and we rushed our exit a little bit because of the war. So we couldn't like sell our house and collect everything. But from what I remember, everybody who immigrated outside of Canada came back after a year and just kind of got their closure. So for me, when I left, I remember making my bed and thinking that I'll be back in a year. It's not a problem, and I'll collect all those, the things that people make for you in school and the little like notes that you write for each other. And I had a box of memories. I just all left it there because I thought we'll just be back and I'll collect all of those things. But it's been 9 years now, so I definitely want to go back and get my closure, I want to say. So I don't know how. I know it will be emotional. I just don't know what kind of emotions that would be, whether it will be happy or sad. I know that from all of my friends who went back, they're saying it's not the Haleb that's in your memory, so don't expect it to be that when you go back. But maybe it will be a healthy thing for me to do, because I'll go back and I'll see that, okay, that's not that anymore. So that dream kind of is just in your memories now. So I'll commemorate the memory within myself versus the location.
And do you know if like your house is still there, and your school that was bombed, is it still standing, or it's completely gone?
It's standing because I saw a documentary about it, and my school a principal was talking, and it was so fun for me to see that, fun and emotional. My house, I'm hoping it is. I know that for as long as I remember, when we went to Canada, we were waiting for news and like hoping that it's still good, and we still had people there. But then when those people left, you almost can't ask someone to go and check for that, because everybody's, it's, you want their well-being, and that's not something you're gonna ask someone for. So I know that I'll be in for a surprise when I go. Hopefully it's still there. Yeah, hopefully it's still there. I don't know.
Do you know if any of the buildings around your building were bombed or anything?
Nothing that we've heard of, thankfully. Hopefully, yeah. They say bad news travels fast, so we haven't heard anything. So,
so backing up to before the war, did you see any signs or clues that something was going to happen?
I know for us when we applied for the Canadian citizenship, I know that it was like a 7 years in the works type of a project. So I know for as long as I remember that we were trying to get out, but not because we were foreseeing necessarily a war, but because we were noticing the changes in the demographic, let's say, or the propagandas, not from within Syria, but from outside. And I do remember when the Arab Spring started, specifically like in Tunisia, that's when it hit me that this is coming towards Syria. And it took almost like a year and a half until it got there. But I do remember, for all I remember, war was my biggest fear, because other wars happened in Syria and in Lebanon, and for like my parents would talk about those things, right? So I do remember that for all I remember, okay, like war is my biggest fear. So when it started, thankfully we knew that we were going to travel, but obviously we rushed things a little bit more. But it was kind of this always unstable, it might happen, but not because the Syrian government wasn't welcoming of us or wasn't inclusive of us, just because of the state of the overall Arab world.
When you said your parents would talk about the previous wars, did they live through them?
They did. So both my parents, I remember they would say when they hear planes are coming in, they would go and like watch them. But at the same time, they would also go into shelters. Same with Beirut or Lebanon, where my aunt actually lives, my dad's sister. Their building was bombed, and I remember them telling stories how they would run out of the building and they would have no water for days or electricity. So you would see the traces of war in that region of the world. So you always kind of have this intuition that, is it going to happen again? You're just always living in that fear. But not because you know exactly this is where it's leading to or this is what's going to happen again. Just because you think if it happened before, it might happen again.
Yeah. And then you said that you had seen some like demographic changes. What do you mean?
Just the different trends that we were noticing, or not just like within Syria, but just around us. The world trends that we were seeing and the type of conversations that were being had in the world. We noticed that it could be an issue. That's when I kind of started. I was growing up too, so I started feeling maybe like more like a minority in Syria versus this is my home, and that's my biggest struggle, that I don't know if I can consider Syria home or Canada home or Armenia home. It's this whole mixed feeling.
Can you tell me, like, if you know or what your thoughts are about why this conflict started and like, why there is war in Syria and why it's not stopping?
I wish I knew. I think obviously it's a known fact that ISIS is now kind of the whole starter of the Arab uprising. I know that a lot of the starters in the first kind of uprising started through like, the government, democracy and whatnot, but then it kind of morphed into something else, that I think people were so consumed already in the initial idea that it's, we're fighting for democracy, it's a revolution, that we kind of missed what was going on. So it is a religious-based war. It has nothing to do with the government. I don't think it has to do anything with external affairs. It is a war that is trying to turn that side of the world into an Islamic state. So I wish I knew more why and whatnot, but...
And I think one of the biggest problems in figuring out what's going on and why it's happening is that like so many different news agencies and news sources say so many different things.
Absolutely, yeah.
So which are like the sources that you find most reliable?
I can tell you the sources that I find not reliable. Sure. So I remember we used to watch Al Jazeera, and I remember specifically I was studying for my final exams for baccalaureate, so like the grade 12, which is a big exam. Like your final exam is worth 100% of your marks, so you're studying for 2 years for that, right? So I'm just at home. It's kind of like you're on the lockdown. You're just studying, doing nothing else. And I remember watching the news, and it said that there was a protest going on in my neighborhood. So I just stepped outside on the balcony, and I'm just looking down. There's no protest going on here. So it was those type of things that they reported, and the clips they kind of put together to make it look like children are dying and this is happening, to kind of get like play with people's emotions, and they serve different political purposes, obviously. And I remember a time where the country kind of split up into people who are pro-government and against government, and that's how you would identify people. So even people that were actors and like famous, whatever industry they were in, anyone who was famous, you would address them as, oh, this guy is pro the government and this girl is against the government, and all of that. So I remember a time where that kind of started happening, and I remember that kind of clicked in me, where this is how it's all gonna get doomed, like, because we're starting to split.
And if you're against the government, which group are you with? The Free Syrian Army, the terrorists, the other like many different factions?
I can't say that, because that's the thing. There's no identified. I think those people, they're definitely not with the Free Syrian Army, is because that kind of does stand for the terrorists. So I don't think anybody is with them. I think it's a matter of people identifying issues within the government or the system, not the government as the people or the president, because like I said before, they were very inclusive and they banned anything that was against inclusivity. They made us feel like home, and that was our home for the longest time, like for 17 years of my life. But I think those people are people who just identified issues within the system, and they took this opportunity to stand against them. But I remember I had a shirt actually with the president's face on it, and I went to be like, I'm with Bashar al-Assad. And yeah, like we were definitely, like, I can't say all Armenians, but from my community, for what I know, is that we were all with him.
Mostly because the government has supported the Armenians for some
has
years.
supported, and this war had nothing to do with him. It had to do, or him or the government, it had to do with outsiders coming in and him trying to keep the peace. So why would we not support someone who's trying to keep the lifestyle that we've always had, which was amazing?
Which sources are pro-government?
News sources, the government channels.
Like they have news channels on TV, and they have newspapers too.
Yeah, they had like they always had news, like they always had the media. They've had media channels and newspaper that kind of try to tell the true story while everything else is going on.
And it's transparent. Like they're not trying to hide that it's run by the government. They say this channel is run by the government.
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody knew. Yeah.
And something that I've heard in response to, the government's just trying to keep life the way that it was, and something that I've heard from people who maybe are a bit more skeptical of that is, well, what about the people who didn't like life the way it was before? And so the government's only looking out for certain groups and not for others who didn't like life the way it was before. Do you think in any way, what would your response be to that?
I think overall, it's not, if the life that the way it was is not great, it has nothing to do with necessarily the government itself. It's that we were, just like Armenia when we had the revolution and we're kind of going towards a more evolved community. It's the same in Syria. So our president was actually an optometrist. Like, he was a doctor who studied in London. He in no way was trying to have the power or this and that, but what he was trying to continue having is the peaceful lifestyle that we had. So I think, yeah, absolutely, there are things that in the community that evolve, especially that you have this very historic country. Like, Damascus was the oldest capital in the world, so obviously there are things that were rooted in the country, or it's evolving, or if there's anything else that was happening within the country, it doesn't need to be specifically from the government, and the government is a whole unit, right? So I can't really speak to that, but I know that the representative of the government that people were going against during the war was definitely, all he was trying to do is keep the peace and the lifestyle that we had.
And now, going back to life during the war, when did you actually decide to meet with your family?
So I know, like I said before, that we were always trying to kind of evolve and go to a different country. And that had nothing to do, like I said, with how Syria was. It's just that because we're Armenians, you always had this identity kind of conflict of where do we belong or what do we do and how do we become better. So we were always kind of striving for that. So we were in the works of getting the Canadian citizenship for maybe 7-8 years. But when we actually got it, we didn't leave right away. So we were still gonna continue our life and finish everything off and get closure on certain things or close the loop. But when the war started, that's when we decided that, okay, we should just get out right now.
So what, like, month, year, date, do you remember that?
Yeah, it was 2011, and it was right before the exams of my grade 12. So I don't know the exact, actually I do remember. May 1st is when we arrived into Canada. I do remember that my dad waking me up. So during the time we left, what was happening is the snipers and the grenade bombs, that was kind of a thing. So I remember that my dad and mom woke me up and they said that they're fearing that they're going to, because they were targeting government institution and locations specifically. So the exam center would have been one and the airport would have been another. So I remember they woke me up and they said, is it okay if you give up like actually going through the exams and let's just leave right now, because who knows if the exam center is safe or if something's gonna happen to the airport. And I said absolutely, because I knew that I have to kind of just close the door on that life, and if we're gonna move, then we should just start it now.
So you said that bombs or whatever were already occurring where in Damascus at that point?
Aleppo is when it kind of all started. Aleppo is kind of Aleppo, Damascus, Latakia, like those are the kind of the location that it was the most heated. I would say Aleppo the worst.
So it was, you were already hearing like planes coming in, or you were worried that they were going to come? Sorry, I missed the beginning.
No worries. There was a lot of snipers, so you knew that on buildings there were snipers. So if you're walking on the streets, there could be a sniper up there.
From which group?
From ISIS.
Okay. And did you ever see anyone?
Thankfully, no. I've heard a lot of stories, but when I was there, I remember we even had like a goodbye party for us. So we went to this restaurant, and then you would be at a location and we'd get calls. Like there were group chats happening, like this location we're hearing there's more snipers, or this location it's not safe. So I remember like packing up and you would just leave to the next location, or you would never be on the street by yourself. Like it was kind of group traveling at that point.
Wow. So the war started in March 2011, and you left in May. You only lived for 2 months, and you still saw so much.
We still felt the impact for sure. Yeah.
So how did your daily life change at all?
Thankfully, not as much as my friends. It was all kind of, you felt it, but you just, thankfully, I didn't see anything, which is interesting to me because for probably 6 years since I've been in Canada, I would have daily nightmares of getting attacked by ISIS and getting into my house. And I don't know if that was through the stories that I heard or through just because we left, but we never really left. And you were still connected and you would hear the stories, and the people you loved are still there. Your family's still there. So I kind of lived it through them, I want to say, but I was lucky enough to not be there at the most heated time.
And this fear that clearly like came from those 2 months, how did it manifest itself in those 2 months? Like, okay, you had those texts that you had to move from place to place sometimes, if there was danger in the area you're in. But like, how else? Like, what else was fear producing for you in those 2 months?
Sorry, can you say that?
Yeah. What made you fearful in those 2 months living in Syria? Was it like, for example, one thing that probably produces fear is getting a text that like there are snipers in the area that you're in. Like, what are some other things that maybe like made you scared?
I think events, like when we heard that the specific building, something happened to it, or I remember the what do you call, like, not the consulate, but
embassy.
Not the embassy, but we've had, let's say, all doctors belong to like the unions, but the associations, yeah. When we heard places like that were getting targeted, and it was all like chatter between the population. So something might happen or something might not happen, but you would still hear about it, and those were the triggers for us, because if they did that, then what's next or what could happen.
Okay. And then why do you think that carried over with you to Canada?
I honestly do think because the people that I loved were still there. And I always tell this story to my friends that I remember this day very clearly. I was sitting on like my bed, and I was on my laptop just doing random things, and I was on Facebook, and then I saw that my friend who was with me in class, and I'm like very close with, his brother was 1 year older and went to the army, and he passed away. And to me, it's like that thing that you think happens but will never happen to you, and you hear that it happens to you. And he wrote a song about it, and it still gets me to this day. I saw one couple of like months ago, and I still cried literally sitting in this living room. It gets to you because it's real. And like my cousin went to the army, and I remember my aunt being just always terrified of what could happen. And when you hear the stories happening to your close people, and like people being in denial of the things that are happening, you still live it through them. So you go to bed, and obviously there's a nightmare that comes with it. Yeah.
And do you think that that's gotten lost now that you're in Armenia?
It's interesting, and I'm trying to figure out why, but yes, since I've been in Armenia, I've been more in touch with my Armenian side than with my Syrian Armenian side. It's also, the situation is a little bit better, and I'm seeing the friends that I was worried about that are living here now, or that have immigrated to other places. So it's almost that I'm not facing my fear in a way, but I'm seeing the people, and they're okay, and I'm hearing their stories, not just reading through it from Facebook or hearing through it from other people, but I'm actually seeing them. So it's made it, I guess, subconsciously better, because I'm not having those type of nightmares anymore.
So when you left Syria, how did you leave? By plane?
Yeah, we just took the plane. Yeah.
And you bought the ticket that day, or you would?
It was very rushed. Yeah, I remember, because my dad said, I checked, there's a plane today. If you say you're okay with giving up your grade 12 exams and whatnot, then I'm gonna go book it. But if you're not okay with it, then you should stay, and we'll go, and like I'll go first and whatnot. And I said, no, like we're all sticking together, we're doing this. And I was so proud that he gave me that choice. My brother at the time wasn't actually studying in Australia, so it was just me, my mom, and my dad. My mom and my dad. And he went and booked it that day, and I think we left within 2 weeks or a week and a half since then. So it was a lot of family coming over to say goodbye, and like packing up, and it was such a messy pack, because I didn't know what to take with me. I didn't know how long I'm going to be gone for. I've never been to Canada. I didn't know what it looks like or what life there is. So it was a lot of just kind of prioritizing and just packing the bare minimum and just heading out.
How much did you bring with you? Like what, 2 suitcases each?
Yeah, I think that's like the standard 2 suitcases. Yeah, so nothing that had to do with emotional things or intangible kind of value, but everything that had to do with clothing and things that will allow us to survive. Because obviously you're going from Syria to a first world country that is, it's expensive. So yeah.
And so when you first got to Canada, what was it like? Actually, I'm sorry, the airport. How was the airport in Aleppo?
The airport was fine at the time. It was still okay.
Was it completely crowded?
No, I wasn't at that time. No, it was still totally normal operations. Thankfully, I didn't witness that, but
yeah. I'm gonna turn it off. Whose phone is that?
Probably mine.
Okay, I'll turn it off. Wait.
Yeah.
One second. So the airport was. So people weren't scared yet to leave?
No, it wasn't at that time yet. No. So it was still normal. I remember we had to fly to Istanbul, and then from Istanbul to Toronto. I was just more terrified of flying than anything else, but it was all still very surreal to me. I didn't realize I'm leaving, and I won't be back until whoever knows. I really was convinced that I'll be back within a year, and everything will be fine, and I would just collect my things and see my friends. So it was more like a vacation than a move for me.
Had you flown before?
Yes. We've traveled a lot as kids. So
Armenia.
Yeah, Armenia. We've gone through Europe a lot. We went to the US before, so that I was scared of flying still, but no, it wasn't that. We've never flown before. Yeah.
And why do you think the other people? Why do you think nobody was rushing, or not many people were rushing to leave? Everyone knew there were snipers, right? Everyone knew that.
Yeah, I think there was a weird thing of what happened. The other uprisings that happened, the Arab Spring, was different than what happened in Syria or Iraq, or it was a much more kind of quicker turnaround. There was a war, there was a revolution, and all ended. So I think that's what everybody expected it to be. Even I remember since we've been in Canada, and other governments, specifically the Canadian one, allowed easier access to Canada or the refugee status and whatnot, and people weren't even considering it. They said, "This is my home. Like, why would I leave it?" So I think it took a lot for them to realize, okay, now I really need to leave. And one of them being my aunt. Like, I remember them. They've only been in Canada now for 3 years, so it took them like 5 years to say, okay, we need to leave. I remember them telling us things like, we would be on the phone with them and they would hear something like a bombing or whatnot, and they would, okay, we're leaving now, and we would hang up, and all we're thinking like, what is going on there? Or they would tell us things how they would recycle water to make the best of resources that they had, because they barely had any water, so they would use it for everything, cooking and cleaning. They would recycle the same water for everything. So it was stories like us that kind of let us live through those days. But I don't think us being on the outside and watching was different than them being there and saying, well, this is my country and why would I leave? This is my home. Yeah.
Okay, so Canada. So you left in 2011 and you went to Canada, and did you have any family there? Did you, like, how did you guys know what to do when you got there?
We didn't. So my mom actually had a friend in Syria whose sister was in Canada, and without ever meeting us at all, we were looking at apartments to rent, like, where are we going to live when we get there? And we were asking her for neighborhoods, what's a safe neighborhood and whatnot. She goes, you're not living somewhere else, you're staying with us. And she actually picked us up from the airport, someone we've never even met before, and allowed us to stay in her house and gave us an entire, like, their basement was kind of an entire apartment. They gave us that as a home to be there for whenever we needed to, until we found an apartment and kind of stood on our feet. So I can say definitely that she was the foundation of our Canadian start life. She took us to get our social insurance number and all of that. So because there's a lot of paperwork in that kind of a world, she was our guide and our support system throughout all of it. So we didn't have any other family, no.
And did you speak any French or English? Did I speak
English, because we went to Toronto. We spoke as much as we were taught in school, which you think you know, but when you get there, you realize that you don't know. So I always say that we were reborn and we felt like we were babies. So the dynamic of our family entirely kind of changed. We went from having this structure of like parents and the kids to all of us are babies, and we're just learning how to walk and how to talk and how to literally navigate ourselves around the city and how to make money to have living, and yeah, so it was kind of a reborn phase of life, which is why you subconsciously kind of start over and you let go of the past, but you don't want to, and you want to continue. But it's a book with different chapters, and each chapter needs to be kind of a continuation, not a start over, which is something I've struggled with.
Why have you struggled with it?
Because when it's a new start and you're 17, you kind of try to start over and you don't want to keep retelling your story, which I found myself doing a lot at the beginning. I kept reintroducing myself. A lot of people in Canada never even heard of Syria up until the war. So it was hard for them because they had that perception of what Syria was, and you're coming here, you're trying to introduce to them. I wasn't just born yesterday. I actually have this whole entire life where I was identified by someone who, like, I was a chess player and I was a flute player, and that was what those were my achievements, right? And then none of that mattered, so you had to just kind of restart. So it's a weird dynamic in your mind where you're trying to bring your achievements and bring your kind of the positives of your past life, let's call it, into your new life, but it's also a new start. So it's hard to not start over.
And when you got there, it was May of 2011.
Yeah.
So, and you hadn't finished high school. So what, like, you had the summer free, and then what was your education like?
Yeah, so I actually had to go back to high school, and I found out that even if I actually completed my high school in Syria, they would have still needed 6 credits from me to be able to apply to universities or colleges. So I did go to high school, and I remember that I
Starting in 9th grade. You did all 4
sorry,
years of high
no,
school?
just grade 12.
Okay.
Yeah, just grade 12. And I remember that the biggest thing for me was I have no idea what the culture is here like. I don't know what to wear. And I know it seems so stupid to think about, but I had no idea what to wear. I had no idea how to conduct myself in a social setting. And therefore, I chose to go to a Catholic school. I'm not even Catholic, but I chose to go there just because they had a uniform, and that would have made it so much easier for me to just wear what everybody else is wearing, because I had no idea how to do that and how the system worked. Like, I came from a place where, like I said before, I went to the same school from 3 years old to 17. So you know how to maneuver your day. And then I'm going to a place where it's so different. Like, the classes are different, the structure of the school is different, how you behave and what's acceptable, what's not acceptable is different. So for me, that was one thing that made it a little bit easier to at least have a uniform and just kind of not worry about what I have to wear in school. Yeah, so I did 1 year of high school there.
And sorry, before school, that first summer, what was it like? What did you do every day? Who did you meet?
I didn't necessarily meet a lot of people. So my parents became my best friends. My brother came from Australia to meet us there, and we were just a unit that was just figuring out how to survive. So obviously our first priority was to just apply for jobs. It didn't matter what it was, just apply. I remember printing 100 resumes and just going places and applying. I didn't know how to say that in English, so I would be like, hello, I was wondering, like, are you guys hiring right now? And I would just drop my resume and walk out. Up until I got a job at McDonald's. So that was like my biggest achievement at the time, that, I get a paycheck for $200, but it was great. So that was kind of our first priority. So I remember not making friends until like 4 years of being in Canada.
So for the first 4 years, you were mainly with your family?
Mainly with my family, working. I had 2 jobs, one full-time, one part-time, and going to school. And we're just trying to kind of catch up with life, I guess is the best way to say it, is that we're just catching up with life and have a background in Canada before I met up with people, because for some reason it felt that my background of being Syrian didn't matter there. So I needed to have a history. I needed to recreate or rewrite my story in Canada to introduce myself to people.
And your brother is older than you or younger than you?
My brother's 2 years older than me. So.
And why was he in Australia?
So, funny story. So he went there as a student, and that was kind of our plan B of if he can go there as a student, and maybe in the future we can join him in Australia. I have cousins there. So it would have been kind of the second. If Canada didn't work out, then we can just go to Australia. Yeah.
And he came right away to join you in Canada?
Yeah, so after the Canadian paperwork got accepted, he already had done a year of university in Australia, but for him it's even harder because he already rewrote his story in Australia, but then he had to come back to Canada and kind of start over again there. Thankfully it was just a year, but so when he came there, we were just one unit trying to support each other and figure it out. Like, we were each other's best friends.
And was it easy for your parents to find jobs?
I would say it definitely was easier for me and my brother. So I remember, after I got the work in McDonald's, my brother was working at McDonald's in Australia as a student. So I was working there, and I kind of started talking about him, but I have a brother, and why would he not work here? And then they hired my brother, and then my dad also, I heard that they were looking for like a manager there, so I talked about my friend, like, he's a dentist, but he can do anything because he's Armenian. And then they ended up saying like he should come in for an interview, and he came in and he got the job. So me and my brother and my dad were working for the same franchise owner. But before we found the job, so it took me a good month for actually to get a job. And I remember that my dad, the strongest person I know, and I think I've told you this before, that he is one of my heroes, that he just he can recreate himself anywhere he goes. But it was the first time that I saw him actually emotionally and cry and say, what did I do bringing you guys here? He felt responsible for taking us out of this comfort zone and bringing us here. Although now looking back, not even looking back, in the moment we knew it was the best move for our future. Like, they gave up everything. He was a dentist, established dentist. My mom was a teacher, and they kind of gave all of that up to have a better future for me and my brother. And knowing that we went there and he was still kind of saying, like, why did I bring you guys here? Like, should we go back? And I remember this day very specifically. My brother and I said, well, if you want to go back, you can go back, but we're staying here. And that was kind of reassuring him that you made the right move for us, and we want to be here, and we want to kind of develop ourselves. So shortly after that, thankfully, we had a job. And because it's hard for you to, and talking even about like finances and converting your money, whatever money you make in Syria is, when you convert it into dollars, it's basically nothing. And the expenses there are so high that he almost wondered if we would survive. And it was like you're racing with time to catch up and actually be stable before you were under.
And do you know if it's possible for him to become a dentist still in Syria, in Canada, or your mom to be a teacher?
He thought it would have been, up until we got there and we were faced with the reality. Because it's interesting, not the false kind of world that people paint for you when they say, oh, a dentist there will make so much money, which is true, they would, but you know, the actual degree is not recognized there. So for you to convert it, when we actually looked into the numbers, it was over $100,000. And I remember him specifically saying, I rather, not that we had $100,000, but if I did, or if I'm gonna ever even take debt, I would rather spend that into your future than me trying to recreate my own future or my own career. So he was fine with doing anything to allow us to be the best selves.
And that's beautiful. So one of your jobs was McDonald's, and what was your other job?
I worked at a bakery. It was a Lebanese, Armenian, Arabic bakery. So my job was to put baklava into the box and weigh it and give it to the customers. I lasted a few months, not even a few months, maybe like a month there, because it was just too much for me to do one full-time job in school and that. So, but I always push my limits. Okay, I can do more. If I have one free hour in the day, then I should be somehow contributing and investing that hour into our future. That's why I didn't have a social life for 4 years.
And what was it like in school?
Very bad. Not to fault anybody, but I just didn't fit in. I knew that I was only there for a year. Those people were at their grade 12 last year of high school, and they were basically ready to, like, they've had this history. They've had, just like the ones I've had with my friends back home, Syria, which is funny to call it home, but it was interesting for me. So I didn't really even try to make that and feel rooted there. I just kind of went through it just for the paper and aesthetics of it, that I just needed it.
Why is it funny to call Syria home?
Because I don't know if right now Syria is home, or if it was the Syrian society that I had was home. So I don't know if it's the country, or it was if it was the actual society that I had there home. So it's so funny for me in my day-to-day when I talk about Canada, sometimes I call it back home. And then when I'm conscious about those words, because like I said before, I was telling you, like, I don't know if I have a home, and I'm just a floating wood on the water, just kind of traveling around and trying to find that place that I can just kind of settle in and call it home. So I don't know if it's the people, I don't know if it's a country. At this point, I am convinced it's not the people, it's the people, it's not the country. So I'm still trying to figure that out. So it's funny when I say things subconsciously and I say back home or back in Syria, or yeah.
And if it is the people, do you have an idea of which people in which community you felt most comfortable in?
Looking back right now, naturally the Syrian community was my home. But now looking back, was it really? And was it my family? Is it my family in Canada? Because the thing is, like, even when you're living your day-to-day life, you're not being with the people you want to be 24/7. You're obviously have other duties and responsibilities. So if you're at work, or if you're forced to live in the community of that country, not just the people you're choosing to stay in a bubble with. So I definitely think it's the people at this point, but I don't know if I can say right now which country and which people those are.
Do you feel, I want to talk about the differences between the different communities, but do you feel that, hold on, first, how many years were you in Canada?
8 years, 8.5.
So do you feel that you've taken on identities from one specific place or all of them? So for example, I think you were saying before that, or maybe you weren't saying, for example, if I had to say that I'm Armenian, yes, I'm Armenian, but of course I have like American tendencies. Like I'm different than a French Armenian or a South American Armenian. So for you, do you feel that you have tendencies from Syria, or what, or have you also taken some from Canada?
Both, yeah. So this summer I actually traveled. So I went to France, and then I went to Greece, and then back to Armenia after living in Armenia for 6-7 months. So since I've been in Armenia, I've been kind of the Syrian Armenian, and I don't know why, but just kind of the people who perceive me, or the kind of questions I get asked, I'm a Syrian Armenian. And I remember when I was in France, I was identified as a Canadian, and then when I went to Greece, I was Armenian, not something Armenian. I was just Armenian. And when I said Armenian, and it was interesting the type of conversations that kind of are ignite from that, right? So it's interesting to me that wherever I am, I get kind of identified with a different type of Armenian that I am. So right now that I'm back in Armenia, I'm a Syrian Armenian. Yeah.
And do you think what are some of the differences from Canadian Armenians, from Syrian Armenians, that maybe would lead you to have different tendencies from each one?
I wish I knew, because that would kind of be the answer that will bring us more together. I think it's more, if I'm a Syrian Armenian, that I have some more Syrian cultural tendencies, or if I'm North American Armenian or Canadian Armenian, that I have. Because the thing is, because I was at different phases of my life when I went to these different countries, I was a professional person who had a career in Canada. So my work ethics are very Canadian or North American, but my childhood memories and traditions and the family traditions that we've had are very Middle Eastern / Armenian. So I think those are where the differences are. So in my one day, I can experience, like at work, I'm very Canadian. But then when I come home and I speak to my mom on the phone, or we have a family dinner or whatnot, then I'm more of a Syrian Armenian or just Armenian. And if I go to somewhere that's very Armenian, that I'm a little bit different, then I bring out the attributes that are more Syrian. So I wish I knew what the answer was, but I think it's based on what aspect of life we're talking about.
And I had a good question. The communities. So in Canada, were you part of the Armenian community? Did you involve yourself with the activities, the agroup, anything? And if so, what was it like?
I think I went there too late to be a part of it versus just being a guest there. So I did attend all the Armenian events that happened not as frequently as it would happen in Syria. So we had like annual events that I would definitely go to and support, but I wasn't one of the organizers, or I wasn't part of the actual community like I was in Syria. And that has to do with different things, like the lifestyle that is there, the priorities that people have, the priorities that I had. I remember I was getting invited to events that, let's say, were $100 per event. And to me, as an immigrant, that was a lot of money. So obviously I'm not going to be able to go. So it wasn't as accessible. The community is not logistically and financially as accessible as it would have been in Syria. So I didn't integrate myself until 4 years. After 4 years, I've had more Armenian friends, and I was able to participate a little bit more. But I can't say that I was a part of the Armenian community, and not by choice, but just by facts.
And did you have refugee status in Canada?
I didn't, no. So we were before that, yeah.
And what differences did you see between the Armenian community in Syria and the Armenian community in Canada?
I think the Armenian community in Syria, we didn't have refugees coming into Syria. We all grew up together. So we've had, when the war in Iraq happened, we've had some friends who came from Iraq and stayed with us, and we were a lot more kind of inclusive just because it's a tighter community, it's a smaller country in a city. So it was easier for them to integrate. But Canada, the Armenians are a minority versus in Syria, it was the Armenians and the Syrians. So I think it was, you kind of get lost in the mix a lot more. You have to put in a lot more effort to be involved. It's not as saturated or active, so that's kind of, it's a lot more effort, and your priorities kind of get mixed, and your survival instincts kind of kick in, and you rather go have two jobs and go to school versus, yeah.
And this idea of like it's a lot of effort to be involved. I think we had a conversation about this before at a different day about how in Syria like everything is just there, like you are part of the Armenian community, but in Canada you had to make an effort to actually go to these events, and you had to make an effort to take your child to Saturday school or whatever it was. And do you think in any way the Syrian Armenians moving to Canada, because there are many of them, have they in any way maybe made that a little bit easier and strengthened the community in some way?
I think in the future they will, but for now they shed light on it more, but not necessarily take action toward it, just because they also have the same priorities of, they just left their homes. They, like, we couldn't sell our house, we couldn't have that kind of fundamentals to walk into Canada or this new community and start ourselves. So it's the same for them. So they all they all walked in with their priorities of survival, and that's what everybody's consuming their day with. So whether it's having full-time jobs and going to schools and readjusting or restarting their life. So I don't think anything has been done yet since I've left, but definitely more conversations are starting because of it. Definitely people are putting more emphasis on the differences and what it could be and the potential it has.
So you got to Canada probably as one of the beginning Syrian Armenian families from the wartime.
Yeah.
Did you see in your 8 years in Canada any difference, like over those 8 years, as more Syrian Armenians came in?
Definitely, yeah. So I think when we went, we were a drop in the bucket. So every once in a while, an Armenian, not necessarily Syrian Armenian, but an Armenian family would immigrate to Canada. But I would say in the last 3 years, there were a lot more. So I think even with the government, they've noticed it more. And obviously, it's a refugee status, so it's different. So it's the types of programs that were offered and the types of support that was offered was a little bit different. And the community knowing that, okay, we know each other, we just came from the same country, we went through the same things. Some people were in the same plane together coming to Canada. So there were a lot more friendships and relationships established. So I'm hoping that will lead to a stronger community kind of establishing itself and evolving, because all those people have the thirst for that Armenian community activities. And some of them actually lived in Armenia before coming to Canada, and they bring up those differences. And the second I arrived back to Armenia, or not back, but I arrived to Armenia, I noticed that I always say, this is kind of like Haleb, but everybody speaks Armenian. So you do notice the difference between kind of that side of the world and this side.
So coming to Armenia, why did you decide to come here, and when did you come here, and what was it like?
So the reason why I decided to come actually doesn't have much to do with the Armenianness of it. I was just stuck in a routine in my life, and I was unhappy, and I had a great career. I was working in the same company for 5 years. I graduated school and I was working with my diploma. So I've had a good established, it's almost like, okay, now what? And
so you graduated university or high school?
College. Diploma, yeah.
Sorry. And what did you study?
Marketing. So I started marketing. I was working in marketing for 5 years. It was a great company. I loved my colleagues. I loved every day of my job there, but I was missing something. So I was kind of stuck in this routine of, what am I doing next? What's next? What's the purpose of life? What's my identity? I had everything but the sense of belonging. So I was looking for that. And I felt that for me, interestingly, to find a sense of belonging, I need to move So I was just at a family dinner and I heard about the program of Birthright Armenia, and it just clicked for me that I have to come to Armenia with this other diasporan Armenians to experience Armenia what does Armenia have to offer. So I came here December 28th. So I actually quit my job September 28th, which was my 5-year anniversary of my job. I thought it would be like a fun story to have. And then, so I had 2 months to kind of prep, say goodbye to Canada and come back. And I remember that I just bought one-way ticket, and my mom always was hoping to find out where my return ticket is. And I was leaving my apartment to go to the airport, and I was closing the door, and I said, bye-bye apartment. And my mom said, no, see you later apartment. And I said, no, bye-bye apartment. I just had this inkling of I'm not necessarily coming back to Canada to live because it's not home. So yeah, I came here December 28th. It's been 8 months now almost, and the second I arrived, it was so interesting to me that it took me 4 years to feel like almost home in Canada, but it was very instant for me here. Although I'll say that the first people I interacted with are my Syrian Armenian friends. The first people that I built a community with are my Syrian Armenian friends that I knew from my childhood that moved to Armenia.
Many of them are here.
Many of them are here. Many of them are here, work here. They've been here for 8 years. So almost since I've left to Canada, they've left for Armenia.
And when you did Birthright, where did you work, and what was your daily routine like? Did you hang out with a lot of diaspora Armenians, Syrian Armenians specifically?
So I worked at a couple of schools in the beginning, the first couple of months. But outside of work, I would hang out with all the diaspora Armenians from around the world that were in the same program, just because I felt more connected to them, because it almost felt like we went through the same history in a way or not. Sorry. I also always feel that I have these 2 separate communities here, my Syrian Armenian friends and the diasporan Armenians that I've met through Birthright. So I've always hung out with them, and then I finally got a job site at my in my field, so marketing. But still I couldn't really integrate it as much as I wanted. Just because I felt the differences. It's almost funny because you always consider yourself Armenian, and then you come to Armenia and you are a diasporan Armenian. So I did feel that difference, and I still feel it. It's after 8 months. I can still say my 2 communities here are diasporan Armenians and my Syrian Armenians. So
what do you talk about with your Syrian Armenian friends?
We don't necessarily talk as much about the history because we try not to. But I was actually mentioning to my friends recently, so one of my childhood friends came back from Germany. He's been in Germany for a while, and he came back, and there's a lot of people who went to the same school that live here, so we went to Gurtasirat. So we did like a little reunion, and he was telling the story of how he's only been out of Syria for three years now, and he was crossing the street once, and he saw that there were snipers, and he waited for the person in front of him to cross quickly to see if they would survive, and he will pass after. And then he saw that, okay, they survived, okay, the snipers are not doing anything, and he crossed so very quickly, and they actually shot. And by the time he was telling the story of how by the time he got to the other side of the street, he wasn't sure if he was alive or dead. Like, he wasn't sure if he actually existed in that moment or not. And those things definitely come up in conversations, in everyday conversations, because it is a part of our history. So when we're telling a story so one joke that we always make is that I never know where everybody is now, because literally I have friends that are in Australia, Dubai, and all over the world. So it's interesting for us to talk about those things. We catch up on those parts, and then we talk about, okay, now what are you doing? So that's always the start of the conversation. But once we pass that, we try to just kind of not to talk about it anymore, and we just talk about what they're up to now and what their future plans are. But it's always a conversation where, have you been back, or are you planning to go back, or what is it like if you've been back? So we kind of try to keep that. Yeah.
It's interesting, Armenians once again being dispersed around the world.
Yeah.
do you think in any way what happened now to the Syrian Armenians because of the conflict is similar to what happened in 1915 to the Armenians?
Yes and no. I definitely feel that what happened, it's not necessarily because it wasn't targeted to the Armenians, but my mom always says like "Hayujalak Akir," like it is something that it's our destiny as Armenians to be always be dispersed, but somehow that makes our ties a bit stronger. Because even when we get together now, friends that I've never even been friends with, but when we see each other in Canada, like okay, but I know you from Haleb, and we now become family events, right? So it's almost that I admire how Armenians that are dispersed and always displaced and continue to, although they weren't the ones necessarily targeted in this event of the world, it happened that where they were living was targeted. But I admire how they continue to use that as something to bring each other together and like create stronger ties with the community. Yeah, so I'm proud of how people reestablished themselves and became who they are in different places and continue to be who they are wherever they went. So in some ways, yes, it's similar because someone who's going from, like I mentioned, from Syria to Germany is continuing to be Armenian, or someone's going to Canada, and although being achieving or thriving in that community, but as an Armenian is kind of, it has similarities, it has parallels, but with what happened in the genocide for sure.
That's a pretty answer. Okay, so now, like looking forward, where do you see yourself in 5 or 10 years?
I wish I knew. I have no idea. Like I said, I'm just in this journey of trying to figure out where home is or where do I belong, which has been a struggle. And I think that's what I'm going to continue doing, to just kind of understand what gives me that fulfillment, what makes me feel, what's my purpose of life. Because if I've achieved great things in my career and that didn't make me feel fulfilled, then that's not it. Or if I've came to Armenia now, I'm going to give this a chance, and that's kind of what I'm going to continue to do, and understanding what are the things that are making me genuinely happy, that are not necessarily tied to the surroundings, or the history, or what's the future like. So I think that's kind of what's interesting to me. But I would say one of my biggest goals is to go back to Syria, not to live, but to just kind of get a closure on that story and just kind of understand what my story looks like. Because right now my story is very chaptered, like I said before, and it doesn't have a beginning and an end. It just needs to kind of fall into places of what does it look like, what's the purpose of it, where am I heading to, what's my purpose. So that's what I'm going to continue working on.
And what, in terms of like Syria, do you think ever about, when the war ends, if there's just going to be some type of justice, or if there's going to be, if you think there should be any type of reparations for people who lost family members, who lost their buildings and property, etc.?
It's interesting you say that, because as of this past year, there were so many videos out there about how the war ended and everything's back to normal. And people are waiting for the airport to open up again, for Aleppo specifically to go back and kind of reestablish themselves there. But what I will say is it's up to us to kind of define what the end of the war means, and to go back if we decide to go back, or whoever wants to go back and take back what belongs to them. Because a lot of family and friends of mine also, I've heard stories of people who've had factories and businesses and everything got stolen, or so do I know if it's not gonna be one for one. I think it's gonna be in other ways that we're gonna find to kind of take back what our rights are. So not necessarily if this was mine and you took it, I'm gonna come and take it back, but what does that look like? So I think we need to define what justice looks like before we go and fight for it, because that's what kind of started the war in the first place.
For you, do you have any idea what it would look like?
I would love for it to just be a community where it was before, where everybody can go back and live peacefully. That would be justice for me, and for everybody to have the opportunity to kind of reestablish what they had in. But everybody has a different definition. So.
And what about like the technical aspects of justice? Like, do you think there should be a tribunal? Should people be punished for what they've done?
Absolutely. I think what everybody needs to align on first, which we're lacking right now, is to identify who were responsible for this. Because right now, that's what the biggest war outside of the physical war is everybody's fighting with their opinions on who was responsible for this and what caused this to happen. So I think that would be the first step of it. And then once we determine who were responsible for it and everybody aligns, one, even if not everybody, but there's an overall alignment, then those people definitely should be tried for that.
And if there were no tribunal and they decided, the community, the country decided we're just going to move on, and for example, in South America, they did this for a period of time where they had no tribunals, nothing. They just decided we're going to forgive and forget, we're going to move on, amnesty laws. Would that policy work in Syria for you, do you think? Would you be okay with everyone just making a blank slate and saying we're starting over new, we're going to forget it all and just move on?
Not necessarily, because I'm thinking about the friend I told you about who lost his brother. How can you just start over? I've seen a clip of this person running after his brother's tomb. Like, that is not something you can just forgive and forget. Yeah, I really think that there should be. Yeah, no, that's not possible. There should be, like, people should be tried, and there should be, like, it should go in history who was responsible for this, even if it's not, because nothing can replace the lives of people who lost. I'm watching documentaries, I'm watching histories, I'm hearing the story of my friends. I've heard a story in Canada of people who actually immigrated to Canada. The husband was at work and the workshop blew up, and I saw the scars on this person's face, and like, that shouldn't just be clean slate. That should be something that should be recorded, that should be tried for. And I know it's not going to be something that will happen in a year, and it will just be, it's not a monetary thing to be fixed, so it would be something that will live forever.
And should each one of those people who had something happen to them have someone be punished for that? Or if they were just a general, just where they got the top people, the top officials, would that be fine?
I can't answer that because I don't know. Like, I'm thankful that I haven't gone through an experience that it was that close to me or immediate family. But I can't answer what will make them feel at peace. But I think whatever makes them feel at peace, they deserve to receive that. So whether it's individuals or an overall organization, I think they should get that.
And what about for those who have lost their buildings and property? Should someone pay to rebuild that, or is it just like, should the government be giving aid for that? Should countries who are involved be involved in the reparations and the monetary aid, or is that not an important part of justice to you?
No, it definitely is. I think, to your point, I think because the people who lost their homes, it's not the actual building, it's their memories, and it's where their family was. So I definitely think, and I know that the government is doing a lot, and I know other external governments are doing a lot. I've witnessed from what Canada has been doing in terms of monetary aid. So I definitely think that is something will happen kind of gradually, where the community will be rebuilt. So whether it's the people who are responsible or just people out of kind of goodwill kind of chip in and help rebuild that community, I think it's something that's necessary to happen.
What has Canada been doing?
So they've been very supportive of like bringing refugees or welcoming them to their communities, and not just welcoming them in terms of the status of, because what they've done is not just include them as refugees, but the second you landed in Canada, you became a permanent resident, which gave you the rights of any other citizen, which is amazing, because those people have already gone through a lot and they don't need to come into a place and feel like refugees. They want to feel like home. They're trying to find their home again. So that's one thing, and they've done a lot of programs where they would help them with employment and monetary things, and how to adapt into the life of Canada, because it was a huge volume of people. There was the need to have those kind of programs of support, and so they've done a great job in that.
Did you get any aid specifically for your family from the Canadian government?
We haven't from this kind of wave, just because we were a little bit before that. But overall, Canada has been an easy country to immigrate to compared to what other stories up here, because just overall the system that is there offers you the health system or the healthcare or the there's so many organizations that are NGOs that help you with employment. So I think overall it's been one of the easier countries to immigrate to.
And what do you hope for Syria?
It's gonna sound like a pageant queen answer, but peace and just a place where people can go back to recollect their memories and relive their memories um, safely. Yeah.
And what do you hope for Armenia?
I'm still trying to find myself in Armenia, so it's hard for me to answer that. But I do hope that it becomes a country where there's not as much segregation between diaspora Armenians and Armenians who were born here. Because when diaspora Armenians are coming here, they're looking for that sense of belonging that they've been talking about their entire life. It, like I said at the beginning of this, is that it's that magical land that you talk about your whole childhood. So when you come here, you want to find that it is that. So I hope that it gets to a place where every Armenian or non-Armenian can come here and feel as home as possible, and not that there's that segregation.
Thank you, Patil.